Let's turn to Syria next, because rebels there have withdrawn from a strategically important town that they've held for 5 years. It's called Khan Sheikhoun. It's in Idlib province, right on the southern point of the province. And bear in mind that Idlib is the last significant piece of territory held by rebels, and you understand why we're focusing on the town. There's been months of speculation that the government may make a bid to take the whole province. That, though, hasn't come yet. But this image shows at least the pressure on Khan Sheikhoun. Here we have the town here. All of this territory marked in grey here is held by the government with support from Russia, closing in from almost every side. We also have this video from earlier played on Syrian media showing the Syrian military entering the town, and we know the town's already been subjected to months of airstrikes from the Russians and the Syrians. I've been talking to Sebastian Usher here in the BBC newsroom with the latest on the status of Khan Sheikhoun.
It seems that the rebels, the jihadist fighters, have pulled out. That happened overnight. So far, it doesn't look as if the Syrian government forces have completely gone in and occupied the town. They seem to be holding back. Not quite clear why. Maybe perhaps there are deals being done at a higher level. Remember, Turkey and Russia are very involved in this area, so perhaps there's something going on there. There's a Turkish observation post nearby, part of the whole buffer zone idea, which was meant to stop conflict happening there. So that may be what's happening in terms they haven't gone in. I mean, there isn't much in terms of people in the town that they left. I mean, 100,000 or so left several weeks ago, and during the last 4 months of the intense campaign that the Syrian government has been waging around that area.
And how do these rebels fit into the broader rebel movement?
Well, even calling it a rebel movement, as I think we've said before, and I'm sure you've had other people, is kind of a misnomer now, perhaps. I mean, one sort of talks about, I suppose you could talk about insurgents, anti-government, but perhaps more accurately jihadist and rebel. So this is probably more jihadist group that was in Khan Sheikhoun, abbreviated as HTS. The dominant force in it is the former Nusra Front, which was, the affiliate of Al-Qaeda. Now it says it isn't anymore. It's moderated its stance to a considerable extent. There's actually another more extreme force which is now linked to Al-Qaeda there. But that's not just in Khan Sheikhoun, but in the whole of Idlib. In the past 6 or 7 months, they've pretty much taken over the area. They administer it.
Well, the United Nations is calling for an urgent de-escalation of the situation in the northwest of Syria. Let's speak to Panos Moumtzis, the UN's regional coordinator for the Syria crisis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the BBC. Despite the UN's calls for a de-escalation, it doesn't seem anyone's listening.
Sadly not. And I think our biggest concern is the humanitarian impact, is the protection of civilians. The fact that at this very point, the hostilities, the conflict that is taking place, the airstrikes or the ground offensive happens around health facilities, schools, residential areas, and civilians have paid really a significant price. So far, we've had more than 500,000 displacements just since the end of April, more than 100 incidents of direct strikes on health facilities, on education facilities, on markets, on residential areas, and hundreds of people have been killed. So the protection of civilians has to be taken into account by everybody. And really, that's our biggest concern, to be able to help people and to avoid seeing women, children, families suffering, given the fact that really this conflict has been going on for 9 years, and yet we're still continuing and active hostilities taking place.
But given all the problems you list, why is the UN so unable to exert any influence over what the different parties are doing?
Well, I mean, the United Nations is the members of the Security Council, is the political will of member states to be able really to bring a political solution. Our work is on the humanitarian side, and for that we're doing everything we can to be able to respond to the urgently needed humanitarian needs of the people on the ground. But clearly what is needed is a political solution to be able to address the root cause of the problem in Syria. And that comes back to member states, to the Security Council, to be able to have an effective impact to the process that is taking place.
Well, given the millions of civilians who live in Idlib and the conflict that is going on amongst them and around them, what are the practical challenges of getting them the support that you say they need?
Well, the challenge is huge and the risks are really tremendous. Risks not just for Syria, not just for the northwest part of Syria, Turkey that is right, and all this is happening at the doorstep of Turkey, and of course the rest of Europe, as we had seen in previous escalations, with a direct impact of outflow of people. So the biggest challenge for us, I think, first and foremost, is to be able to have access, to be able to go as close as possible to the areas where people are fleeing, given the fighting, the airstrikes, the ground offensive that is taking place. And then, of course, it's the financial side, to be able to have the funding, to be able, the means, to be able to deploy everything that is needed, from shelter to medical assistance to food, water, to give people the bare minimum of what is needed. So funding is crucial, and of course the peace and stability for us to be able to operate. We have a significant operation that takes place cross-border from Turkey, and Turkey facilitates that operation for the humanitarian actors on the ground. On a monthly basis, there is 3 million people whose life depends on this cross-border humanitarian assistance that gets to areas in need. There's also people who are displaced in government-held areas, and at the moment we're working and operating from all areas to help the people in need based on the humanitarian principles.
And bearing in mind the scale of the problem you describe and the scale of what needs to be done, is it a frustration to you that Syria was once the biggest story in the world, the biggest concern in the world? It's not the biggest story in the world anymore, and it's not getting the attention it would have been getting even 2 years ago?
Absolutely. It's a huge frustration and disappointment, because on a daily basis, we live through the humanitarian actions and see actually the impact on civilians and what's happening on the ground. And at the moment, there is certainly a fatigue, a conflict that's been going on for 9 years, where really doesn't seem to be making the world news, and most importantly, to be able to have an impact on the political actors to take the necessary action in order to ensure a peaceful way forward that does not impact the civilians who are in this area. Most Syrians who live there really have been displaced multiple times. The average family had to run away 5 or even 10 times to survive if they were lucky. And yet this is happening again and again, and we see it in front of our own eyes on a daily basis. For the last 100 days, there's been on a daily basis airstrikes, ground offensive happening around places which are really schools, clinics, markets, residential areas, which should not have been happening.
Panos Moumtzis, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us on Outside Source.
Thank you.